Hello again, and welcome back. I am McSnazzi, and today we are back in Planet Zoo for another episode of our Ranger Park Zoo series. Today I have an exciting and long one for you today, so I hope you're comfy, but before we get into this, please consider subscribing down below. It's completely free and it really does help out the channel. Now, to get into today's episode, it's going to be a longer one, and technically it's going to be episode number 19 and 20 due to the length. I didn't want to put this into two different videos and release them at different times because I didn't want to cut the build in half. I didn't want to show half of the build and then show another half with the final product. What I want to do is I want to show it all at once because it makes much more sense to do it that way, and it's just much more enjoyable to see the final product at the end. But if you don't want to stick around for the really long time lapse, there's going to be timestamps down below showing you when we finish the building, when we start building the different exhibits for this episode, and when we start the real-time live walkthrough where I take you through the final product of the build with commentary. So if you're interested in any of that other stuff and you don't want to stick around for the whole entire thing, check it in the description down below for those timestamps, and it's going to be also on your scroll bar as well. So without further ado, let's get into what exactly we are building today. Today we are building probably the biggest build in the entire zoo, probably the biggest build I've done, other than maybe the polar bear build, which is just huge in size because of the requirements for the polar bear. But this is going to be the Primate's house, where we're going to have 3 different species of great apes in it. We're going to have the western lowland gorilla, the western chimpanzee, and the mandrill, all in this big primate house that looks great. It has this cool style, and we got really creative with the different viewing angles we have for the guests, and I can't wait to get into it and show you guys. And I'm just super excited for this video if you can't tell, so please leave a like down below if you do enjoy it, because this took a long time to make and took a lot of time and effort, but I'm happy with the result, and it just gets me excited to build more and more in this zoo. But let's talk about what we're doing on screen a little bit, since it's been rolling for a while and I've been rambling. So what we're doing for this building, the primate house itself, is we're kind of going for something that is more of a classical style, sort of like a brick style. It's called classical style in the game. It's more of an older building sort of feel, and since most of the buildings we have in this zoo so far look more like newer development buildings, none of them have this old classic style, kind of like what we're building with here. So I wanted to try doing something like that for this primate house. Plus I haven't really built in it a ton except for pretty much only the reptile house that we built in Timber Gorge. If you haven't seen that build, link in the description below. Pretty good build, really proud of that one, but we did build with this sort of style. So I have experience with doing with it maybe once, but you know, a lot of the research I did, I looked at reference material for sort of primate houses and like great ape houses. They either have this sort of very cliche, stereotypical African like style, and we've already kind of done that in a lot of our African like savannah safari and our elephant exhibit and things like that. So I wanted to switch it up, make it a little more classy. It's either that African style or it's this sort of classical brick style that it was made like a long time ago, because I guess when zoos sort of started originating in the US, sort of some of the first animals were like the great apes because they were very interesting, and I don't know. I don't know all the history, but that's just my assumption. But here we are, we're gonna be doing something like that. So what I did was sort of build that front facade, and what I did was copy it 4 ways. So basically it's the same sort of front thing. It's a symmetrical sort of square building where it's all sort of the same on each side, but the front entrance is the only one that you can walk in from. The other sides that have sort of the front entrance facade, we're going to switch out and put windows on, and they're going to look out into each of the exhibits, as you can see here, as we did sort of a big cut to this because there's just so much in this video. I had to do a few big cuts in order to, you know, sort of trim it down to like 40 minutes because it would be way too long if it was an hour. But here we're doing exactly what I was saying before. There's going to be 3 different big exhibits here, a bunch of view angles for these exhibits. So They're going to be split up in these 3 different corners. One's going to have the front entrance, the other sort of facade or sides of the buildings are all going to be viewpoints down into these different habitats. So we're going to have the gorillas, the chimpanzees, and the mandrills in here. They're each going to have sort of this lookout point window on the inside of the primate house. Then there's also going to be, as you'll see in a second, a downstairs where you can see sort of into their indoor like cave viewing, even though they're not really in caves. That's sort of what I'm using as an analogy for this. It's sort of viewing them in their indoor sort of habitat for when it's cold out or if they want to get some shelter on a hot day, something like that. But you're also going to have a third viewing point, which is going to be these outside sort of gravel trails that I just made on the screen. But now we're doing the building of the paths, because in order to sort of make this like different tiers of viewing and make this sort of underground viewing along with the upstairs, we're going to need to work with the paths. So we're going to make these paths sort of floating for this upstairs area, or sort of the main level of the primate house. So that's what we're doing on the screen here, and I have to push the terrain down a lot underneath in order to fit these other paths where we want to put sort of this underground viewing where you can see the inside of sort of their indoor sort of shelter area. So I played around with it a lot, and as you can see, I'm sort of trimming stuff off the building here. I was initially going to do those sort of main level viewings are going to be viewings down into the indoor area initially. Then you're going to walk out into these outdoor areas where you're going to be able to see them outside in sort of their natural habitat, not the indoor habitat. Instead, I sort of make it 3 different viewings now. So we're going to have the indoor viewing where you can see out into their outside from the inside of the primate house. You can go outside to see them from different angles on those gravel paths, and you can walk down the stairs and you can look at them in their indoor area, because each of these primates are going to have their own indoor area, from the downstairs sort of basement underground viewing. So it's very interesting. I've never seen anything like this in Planet Zoo. It was sort of really tricky to get to work, but it ends up working in the end. And that's why it kind of took so long to make, and there's so much footage for it, because building this sort of primate house building was a feat in itself, but then adding on 3 different animals to the video, make 3 separate habitats, was a whole nother demon. So that's why the video is so long. Usually we only build either 1 building or 1 animal habitat. This episode we're building a building, the biggest building that we've built, most complicated building we built in the entire zoo, and we're doing 3 animal habitats. So that's why it's going to be episode number 19 and 20, because I can't justify it being just 1 episode at this point. But now we're going to sort of build this downstairs. So the guests need a way to go downstairs. The only way to sort of do it is sort of trick the game, even though it's not necessarily tricking the game, but we're going to make sort of this stairway and we're going to cover it up later like it doesn't even exist. But the guests can use it to get down there. We're going to cover up a lot of the area with walls just so there's less, interior work to do in these awkward, like, underground spaces. We don't do too much underground because it's very unrealistic to have, like, a ton of stuff underground like this, but it was super cool to do something like this, and I think it turns out great. You'll see what I'm talking about more when we do the live play in just a few here, as there's still a lot of time lapse left here. But now we're going to start outlining the exhibits, sort of making this underground viewing area like I was talking about before, separating all these 3 different habitats into different areas where the glass can see, and then sort of charting them out so they have this sort of indoor or like sheltered area where they can sleep and things like that, or go on when it's raining out or it's cold outside in the winter or something like that. A little bit of the realism added onto it. Every time I visited the apes at a zoo, you always have this option to like look into their indoor habitat, because they have an extensive indoor habitat. I guess it's pretty common to have something like that, so that's what I wanted to do for this, even though in this particular build here they have a lot of space outdoors as well. So there's a little bit of both. It's like that in real life too, but they're outdoors, a little more intricate because it is Planet Zoo and we can get a little fancy with it. Over here, we're going to have to build a sort of staff area. I wanted to add this sort of backstage footage in here where I do put down a little bit of a staff building, and we're going to sort of fence this off here. It kind of has to do this because we need a habitat entrance for this middle sort of habitat here, because the other two we can access from the underground viewing area, but we can't sort of fit one in for the middle one, so we're gonna have to put it on the outskirts here. And the only way to sort of justify that is sort of fencing it off, making it as sort of a backstage area, but in the end it all looks great. You know, I put a lot of foliage around it too. We get a lot of trees and things, and it's all very seamless once you see it in the live play, even though right now it looks very all over the place, rudimentary, and kind of crazy. So here we're going to cover up the stairs. Of course, the best way to do it is we're going to put some big gardens out front of this primate house, something that is pretty common for these older sort of buildings at zoos. They're going to be very big gardens along them, a lot of ivy on the brick and stuff like that. And we're going to do that a little bit later as well, but in order to cover up that stairway, we're going to need to put something on it, and the mulch here worked fantastic, putting the gardens over it. We put a lot of plants over the mulch, and then it covers up the guests sort of walking down through the ground, so it works out in the end. It's just another little trick you can use in Planet Zoo to sort of make things work when, you know, the path system doesn't necessarily let you do everything you want. A lot of what this build is right here is very unique, very complicated, but a lot of that is because the paths are the way the paths are, and we can't really put paths in the ground or under the terrain, stuff like this, blah blah blah. So that's sort of the issue with it here and why we had to do it this way, but it works in the end. And it's a shame though, because I wish I could make sort of a detailed stairway on both sides of the building where it actually like works and looks nice, but there's just not enough room on the building and it just wouldn't make sense. So here we're going to start building our first habitat in just a moment. We got to finish up sort of making these underground or indoor entrances for the animals here. We're have one of these on each side for each of the different species we have here, the 3 different habitats here. It's just basically the simple sort of the same exact style of building, just downward with a little bit of an entrance there, and I do add a little bit of decoration later to it. First we're going to do the lettering. I kind of wanted to show this. All these new fonts are actually fantastic though, with the aquatic pack or the free update. Not sure what they came with, but love these new fonts, the 2D. They work out really nice, so they look really nice and they can fit on different places like that. And they're not sort of popping out of the building like before, and they're kind of smaller and look more normal and less cartoony than the other fonts that the base game came from. But here we go, we're finally at the point where we're done with the primate house and we can build the exhibits. So the first one we're going to build here is the gorilla. Like I said before, there's timestamps in the description below and along sort of your scroll bar there at the bottom if you're watching on PC. I think it shows up on mobile as well, or wherever you're watching it. You can see I've divided it between gorillas, mandrills, and chimpanzees. So if you don't want to watch a certain habitat build, you can skip to a different animal and vice versa. They're all sort of similar, but I did want to do something different with each one. So they're all laid out. The terrain in each one is laid out differently than the other. The climbing structures are a little different in each one as well, and sort of the foliage is different in each one as well. I didn't really repeat any of that as well. So I guess they aren't very similar, but they all sort of have the same style, but they're all sort of unique in their own way. The animals are a little different as well. The gorillas like a ton of dense foliage, not a lot of climbing, but they like a little climbing. The mandrills, not as much foliage, a lot of climbing, and the chimpanzees, a whole lot of climbing and a bit of foliage. So to be honest, climbing structures in this game, I've not built a whole lot of them. Not really my strong suit either. I know some YouTubers and some content creators that make some pretty good looking climbing structures. Me, not so much. I like doing a lot of foliage work and things like that. That's sort of my strong suit. Building buildings as well, I think, would be sort of my strong suit as well. But not climbing structures. But I think as we move through each one of these habitats, I do get a little better. So the gorilla one here, pretty basic, kind of boring. The next one's going to be even better, and then the last one we do for the chimpanzees I think is my best work, at least as far as climbing structures go, which isn't isn't very high standard, let's put it that way. But for the gorillas here, I had a lot of fun doing a little bit of rock work on the outside and a lot of foliage work on the inside. They don't like a ton of climbing, so they didn't need a lot of climbing structures. I just built a couple basic ones. We're going to put some enrichment items on them, but a lot of these sort of reference images that I looked at for gorilla habitats, lots of rocks. They put lots of rocks in these gorilla habitats to make it look sort of like they're living in the mountains or something of Africa, sort of like the hills where there's some rocky caves that they live in, but they also live in a dense jungle as well. So lots of foliage, but also lots of rocks, sort of contrast there, but they work together in sort of this dense jungle sort of feel. And it's like you're in gorilla country when you sort of see some of these habitats. You're really taken into the habitat itself, and that's sort of the feeling I want to go for here. It's going to be sort of immersive. You feel like you're sort of in the gorilla zone, and not so much that the gorilla's sort of in the human-made enclosure. So that's sort of the feel I like to go with all of my habitats. But here for this one, even more so, because it seems like a lot of these realistic habitats that I use as a reference sort of go for that feel as well, where you're kind of just a visitor in the gorilla's sort of jungle when you're at these habitats. So. But it was a lot of fun making sort of the jungle habitats. I like using a lot of foliage in the game. I know I stated that before, but you can't really get that sort of same level of sort of beauty and realism. Not necessarily realism, but more the builds don't look as good unless you are allowed to use like a lot of foliage. Otherwise, they just look kind of plain and empty. And I know realistically a lot of zoo exhibits sort of look plain and empty sometimes, but it is a video game, so we want it to look kind of nice. So it's a lot of fun having these situations where I can use a lot of foliage and sort of get a little crazy with it and sort of make some cool things. So the gorilla habitat and pretty much all of these allowed me to do this. So we're going to put up a little pond right here, just sort of a drinking source. The gorillas don't actually swim in it, sadly, but I'd like to imagine they would if they could. It's sort of also another source of water. It just makes the habitat look a little nicer too when you add a little bit of natural water to it. So I like to do that for most of my habitats anyway. But now we actually get to go in and put in some foliage and vegetation here. So what I'm going to do is sort of try to condense, maybe that's not the right word, try to make the habitat feel a little more hidden for the gorillas so they feel like they're actually like in the jungle and hidden from the guests. I don't want them to be so out there where there's not a lot of cover for them. I like to put up a few trees sort of blocking the line of sight of the guests in certain spots so they can only really see the gorillas from certain areas. So it sort of limits the stress on the animals, because I have had some trouble with the stress levels of some animals, specifically for my tapir and anteater habitat, where the guests could just see them from any which way, and they sort of got stressed about that. So I try to take that into the mind with sort of the habitats I do now, and that's sort of a realistic thing to do as well. At a zoo, you're not necessarily looking at these animals from every angle possible. It's usually guided, and there's certain spots where you can look out and see, and those spots are sort of clear, while other spots are sort of either walled off or they have a lot of trees in front of them, so you can't really see what's going on. And so sort of a realism aspect, sort of a game feature aspect too, if you think about it that way, and also sort of an artistic aspect where you kind of want to put a lot of trees in here so it looks pretty natural for the gorillas. So it works out in a lot of ways. Maybe not for the guests, you don't get as many cool sight lines, but it does work, and I think it does make the habitats feel even more immersive and even more well decorated for these animals. So not much left on the gorilla habitat. I'm going to let the music play a little bit, and I'll jump back in when we start building the mandrills in just a second. I hope you guys liked what we did in the finishing sort of moments there of the gorilla habitat. I like the result of that one, but we're gonna move upward here and get even better as we continue these sort of habitats. Now we're going to start doing the mandrill habitat. In the mandrill habitat, there's going to be a lot more a lot more mandrills in it. There's only 3 gorillas in the gorilla habitat, but for the mandrills, there's going to be about 8 mandrills in this. So we're going to need to accommodate the space a little better, have more enrichment items, more feeding stations as well. So it's just things to think about. These habitats, these last 2, the mandrills and the chimpanzees, are going to be a little bigger than the gorilla. I put the gorillas in the smaller of the 3 because there's only 3 gorillas, of course. And the last 2 are sort of pretty similar in the amount of size there is, but the mandrills are in the smaller of the last 2 because we're going to have about 10 chimpanzees, and we end up making the habitat a little bigger when we are building the chimpanzee habitat next after we build this one. So for this mandrill habitat, I want to go with a little different, bit different of a feel here because I wanted them to all be sort of unique in their own way. So for this, sort of the terrain is like a little bit of a ravine in the middle and then sort of cliff edges on the outside, as opposed to the gorilla one, which is a little more organic with some raised areas and lowered areas, but it was pretty much sloped to each other. Now I had to put this little slope here in the ravine due to the fact that the keepers would not be able to reach the enrichment items for the mandrills, so unfortunately we had to do that. I wish we didn't have to do that, but it is what it is. So for this one, I'm trying to do a little bit of a different sort of climbing structure build up here. It's sort of similar, and I do end up using a couple of the in-game blueprints for some of these, as you can see right here. But I do like what they have here with these in-game blueprints of these sort of long log pieces where they're sort of in a climbing pattern. So I do enjoy these, so I do use the other ones they have aren't as good, and I try to do custom stuff when I can because it's a little more interesting to watch that, and you can get pretty unique with it. But I like what I do here for the mandrills. There's quite a few of them, and I have actually seen them get up to the top there, so they can climb all that stuff as well. We're just going to plop down a few enrichment items here and there, do a little bit of vegetation work, some terrain paint, and then add some rocks as well for this habitat on the screen here. But I would like to also talk about, while this is sort of playing out, my plans for the next video. Not sure where I want to go to next, but I don't think I'm necessarily done with the sort of ape area here. I kind of want to do a lemur house, and I'll talk about that more in the live portion. Sort of next to this primate house, because I didn't get a chance to build any of the lemurs yet, and the capuchin monkey or whatever it is in the South America DLC, kind of want to put them in here as well. Also want to do the snow monkeys if possible. Not sure if I will be able to, because I don't want to do too many of these apes, because you know we're nearing towards the end of the zoo, and I need to sort of budget space based off of sort of a variety, and I still want to do an aquatic center with some penguins and some sea lions in this zoo. I still want to do another bear, probably the panda bear and maybe the red panda, just to get some more Asian animals in here as well. And I still want to do the rhinos, and there's just a lot I still want to do. So I'm not sure if I'll be able to do the snow monkeys or the Japanese macaques, whatever you want to call them, in this zoo, but maybe I'll do maybe a one-off build of them, because I've always wanted to build a habitat for them. So maybe we'll get to that, but future sort of builds, I want to do everything that I just said, plus I want to do timber wolves, and I want to add a reptile house, of course, because you know that's a staple. You kind of need those in zoos like this. So a few things still left to do. I think it's manageable. Still a lot of episodes incoming, but I do want to cap off this project at some point, since this is technically going to be episode 19 and 20. We're already at the 20 episode mark, which is a huge feat. Thanks for all the support on the series as well, but to get us to this point. But I'd like to finish the zoo at some point, maybe move on to a new project as well. But you know, this is sort of my baby. It's sort of my pet project, and I want it to last as long as it can, but at some point it's going to get a little laggy because of all the stuff we have in here already, but still a long way out. We still have a lot of builds to do. but the mandrill habitat is looking a lot better with a lot of foliage in it. Not as dense as the previous one in the gorilla habitat, but for this one, you know, the mandrills do not like as much of foliage as the gorillas do, so a little bit more mountainous, like using a little bit of the rock work to separate the terrain a little bit. And that's going to be pretty much it for this habitat. We're going to move on to the chimpanzees now. This is probably my favorite of the three, at least of what I built for this. This one's going to be a little different than the last. We're going to expand it a little bit in a second, but sort of the big feature of this one is the chimpanzees. They love to climb a lot, so we put a lot of climbing items in this habitat. And the biggest feature for this habitat is going to be sort of this like mountain or this like middle hill where it's kind of too hard for the chimpanzees to climb up organically, so they're going to have to use sort of these climbing structures in order to get to this middle platform where they can hang out on. And this is sort of reference to something I thought I saw at a real life zoo visit when I visited a zoo. After researching to try to find a little bit of reference imaging for this sort of idea that I had in my head of this sort of like mound that the chimps can climb on, I didn't find anything related, so maybe I just kind of made that up, but nevertheless, it's sort of the focal point of this habitat, and the chimpanzees can run around and climb on all these different climbing objects. And there's going to be a bit of foliage. We're going to put a little bit of a water pond here just for them to drink, and they don't swim like the gorillas as well, but something a little different than the gorillas and the mandrills. So it's par for the course. We're trying to do something different for each one of these, and I really like how this one turned out, as we're going to do a little bit of terrain paint here, sort of making the habitat look a little more realistic and get that sort of sorted out. But without further ado, I think I'll just let this build sort of play out. I've already talked a lot during this video so far, and I will be doing some more commentary during the live playthrough in just a moment when we are done with the chimpanzee habitat here. But I'll let the chimpanzee habitat play out here with some music, and I'll see you guys all in the live portion when we go through all of the builds and their finished product. So I'll see you guys in a second in the live playthrough. Alright everybody, welcome back to the real-time walkthrough of the build. I'm so excited to show you guys all the finished product of the Primate house. As you can see here, I've done a lot of work off camera, sort of fleshing out the area, making it look nice, and sort of polishing everything for the final build. Since the time lapse was pretty long, it was definitely needed some off-camera work. So let's get into the Primate house here. We sort of have this front entrance right by the outer river, sort of outside of the bear walk, where we're going to do some more work over here. I'm thinking we're going to put an eatery here, but that's not important for this episode. We're going to walk up right here. We hit with a fountain, sort of the older style, classic style, like the building here. I wanted to keep that sort of theme going, so I did a fountain here, and over here I put a statue of a gorilla, sort of like a piece where guests can go and take their picture with the gorilla. I see this a lot at zoos. They have sort of these statues where the kids can climb them and take pictures. So I sort of made a focal point to do something like that here. Over here, I kind of want to build, I've left this open because I want to build a lemur house here. I mentioned that a little bit in the time lapse, so if you weren't here for that, I want to build a lemur house with different lemur species and probably the capuchin monkeys as well. But without further ado, let's enter the actual Primate house. Big gardens up front, ivy on the brick. It's just a different style, and I just love the result here. A little dark inside because the lighting in this game tends to get a little darker when you enter sort of indoor areas, but we have this big tree in the middle, and I wanted to go something unique like this. I think this is super cool, and I really like it, sort of like a live tree living in the middle with the sort of glass ceilings above, so it gives the light to the tree. Looks like it's been here for a while, and you can look down when you're on this main story down into the underground viewing, where you can take a look at the indoor habitats for each of the ape species here. But before we do that, let's check out the rest of this main floor. So we have the underground viewing. You can go through these doors to get down to that. Outdoor viewing on each side for each of the different species. And then we have sort of these, this is a workshop item, this sort of education board here. I'll link it in the description below, but we have education items for these animals, and we can just check these guys out here. The Mandrill habitat looking very nice. Really like how everything turned out. That sort of enrichment items teetering there on the climbing post. But see, they climb on those posts over there. They enjoy themselves. They hop around and have a good time. So over here we have the chimpanzees, of course, the finished product of this. Really happy with how this turned out. Very unique. Lots of climbing structures for the chimps here. They have that little mountain mound in the middle for them to sort of try to get on there and become the king of the hill, so to say. And lots of just foliage work, rock work, just makes a unique looking area, and I'm really happy with the result of this one as well. And then finally, the first build we did in the time lapse, the gorillas here. And the gorillas have sort of a smaller habitat since there are only 3 gorillas, but very densely vegetated, lots of foliage here and lots of rock work as well. They're a little more secluded. They have a little bit more tree coverage than the rest of the apes in this Primate house, but that's just the nature of the species. They like it that way. So I tried to add a few trees here and there so you can't always see where they're at. So let's head out to one of the outdoor viewings. We'll start over here at this gorilla outdoor viewing. I made sort of a little fence here. I think it works. Right next to the gardens, we have the gravel path that runs along, where we have some benches for you to check them out. And there's just different viewing angles where you can check out the gorillas from. And we have this for each one of the species here, as I'm going to show you in just a second, but I just love these different angles that you can see them from. I think it's a very unique way to build a building in this game. We'll check out this other one for the gorillas here, out here, sort of this little terrace as well. Go over here and we can see sort of the gorillas hanging out down there and enjoying themselves in their little habitat, and a little bit of foliage work here to separate these two areas. The chimpanzees are over here. Our little backstage area sort of showed on here, and the guests do use the benches. I like to see this. It's a nice little shot there as well. But we'll check out the chimpanzees. This is sort of one of their angles for the outdoor viewing here, and I think it looks great as they're filling up that enrichment item right there. Lots of space. It's blocked by a few trees, which is nice, so the chimps have a little bit of privacy, but they have a lot of stuff to climb around on, and I think they really enjoy it. So I'm happy with the results of this habitat. We'll head over to this second to last sort of viewing area, another angle that we can see the chimps from as they climb on their little enrichment items. I like seeing them use sort of these climbing poles, and it's fun to see. But another great angle, and over here we have another angle as well. Put a little fence here to sort of hide this so it's a little more private, some trees as well. So it's kind of like your own little like zone, or your own little area for just looking at the primates here, separated from the rest of the zoo. It's nice and cozy, and I do enjoy going for that feel. So here's the mandrills, a little more open as they do enjoy that, and they're just hanging out down there. And we'll check out the last sort of outdoor angle here for these guys. And they have a few trees over here, make it a little more secluded, but lots of rock work, lots of foliage work, and as you saw in the time lapse, it took a long time to make all of these, so I hope you guys do enjoy it. But they're just hanging out down there. But let's go to the last sort of thing here for this live walkthrough before I jump out of first person and maybe do some other showings here. We're gonna step down these hidden stairs. You're not supposed to see any of this, but I put a bathroom down here as well. But you go through here to sort of this underground viewing, and it looks like the guests just kind of walk down here to use the bathroom, but don't really check them out. But I thought this area was cool. The indoor tree with a little bit of foliage, where there's sort of like a park vibe here with some benches around it. Here's the exit and the entry down here, as I spoke of, and you can just check out the gorillas in this sort of indoor habitat when they're inside. Check out the chimps when they're inside as well. So he's got a couple hanging out in here. We got one sleeping over here. And check out the mandrills when they're inside as well too. So you can check out all the animals from all these different angles. And look, some guests do actually come down here. And I thought it was very unique. Lots of tiers here where there's lots of different angles that you can view from. Super happy with the results. Very, very excited to show you guys this, and I hope you guys do all enjoy it as well. So let's hop out of first person here for a second and take a look at the build as a whole. Forgive the off-centeredness of that right there. Couldn't really work it with the grid, but beautiful. I love how this area looks, and we filled up such a big area. I mean, it's very highly detailed. 3 new animal exhibits, and just a lot of work and care went into this, and I hope you guys did enjoy this build. I had a lot of fun making it, and it's probably the biggest build in the park so far. The biggest build in the zoo. That's why it's going to be 2 episodes in one, so I hope you guys did enjoy it. But if you guys did enjoy it, please leave a like down below. Leave a comment if you have anything to say, any requests for future videos as well. I am working on a time-lapse or a tutorial video for making a Planet Zoo map in Adobe Illustrator, so that'll be releasing soon after this video, as I just got to do a little bit of voiceover for that one. But please subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help out the channel, and it's completely free. You can unsubscribe at any point. Thank you all again for watching. I hope you did enjoy it. Check me out on Twitter for channel updates and some screenshots that I put on there, some teasers sometimes too. Check out some of the YouTube shorts I've been doing on the channel as well. Just little tidbit videos for you guys to enjoy. Trying out the new shorts beta, see how that works as well. But thank you guys again for watching. More episodes and more Planet Zoo content in the future. Please stay tuned on the channel for that. And until next time, I'm McSnazzi, and I'll see you guys in the next one.